It's time to move on to the next plenary session, which is a timely topic. Living with COVID-19, what does the future hold? Chairpersons for the session are Dr. Sanath Vanikasuriya and Dr. Uma Gavri Saravanamuttu. Over to you, Dr. Vanikasuriya and Dr. Saravanamuttu.
Good morning from Sri Lanka, everybody. Now, the next talk is going to be about most burning topic all over the world these days. This is the reason why we are having this conference, annual conference, virtually, 100% virtually. That is COVID-19 virus.
Yeah.
So the next topic is going to be living with COVID-19. What does the future hold? So our speaker is Dr. Saranga Sumatipala, the consultant medical virologist, teaching hospital Anuradhapura. Let me introduce him briefly. Dr. Sumatipala obtained his MBBS from the University of Peradeniya and did his postgraduate diploma in medical microbiology and MD in medical virology. He had overseas training at Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust primarily, then Virus Reference Department, Public Health England, London, then King's College NHS Foundation Trust, London. He worked as a consultant virologist at National STD AIDS Control Program and is currently working as a consultant virologist at Teaching Hospital Anuradhapura and consultant virologist at PCR laboratory at Colombo East Base Hospital, Mulleriyawa. He is currently involved in the capacity of a consultant in COVID-19 related work at the Ministry of Health. Dr. Saranga Sumatipala, over to you.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I wish to thank Sri Lanka College of Oncologists for inviting me for this speech. The topic will be living with COVID-19, what does the future hold? During the next 25 minutes or so, I will be talking regarding the following in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. As all of you are aware, the roots of this pandemic goes back to November 2019, where an outbreak of severe respiratory illness was detected in association with a seafood market in Wuhan city in the Hubei province of China. The causative agent of this outbreak was identified as a coronavirus in January 2020, and later it was named as SARS-CoV-2 or SARS-CoV-2. And the clinical disease, the clinical entity which was caused by this organism was named as COVID-19 or coronavirus disease 2019. And WHO declared a global emergency on the 30th of January this year, as well as it was declared as a pandemic in 11th March 2020. The first locally transmitted case in Sri Lanka was also reported on 11th of March 2020, after which the case number keeps growing gradually. Yeah. As of now, the whole world has been engulfed by this pandemic, with the latest figures showing that there are 53 million plus cases of COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 infection, plus and 1.3 million deaths cumulatively, and these numbers keep growing as well. Sri Lankan figures, Sri Lanka up to now we have about 16,000 plus cases, PCR positive identifications, plus 53 deaths among them. Now let's talk a bit about the pathogen. Coronavirus belong to a group of large viruses which are ubiquitous around the world. The central reservoir of coronaviruses are bat species. They spill this infection to other animals, which includes birds and mammals. In this particular virus, there has been a doubt what is the source. Some of speculating it comes from pangolins, snakes, but studies show that it comes directly from bats without involvement of a transitional host. So, if you look at the virus, its genome is made out of a single strand of positive sense RNA with its nuclear capsid covered by a lipid membrane. And this from this lipid membrane, spiky glycoprotein structures can be observed. And these spikes give the coronavirus the characteristic appearance with a halo or a crown, which the name corona was derived from. And this virus replicates and forms new viruses using an RNA-dependent RNA polymerase. Now let's talk a bit about the epidemiology of this disease. At present, this virus has the human as the main reservoir, while some animal species are either incidentally or accidentally shown to be susceptible to it. An infected person on average infects 2 to 3 more people before becoming non-infectious. The primary route of infection is the respiratory route, where the direct transmission predominantly occurs via large droplets, which can be carried up to 6 feet or 2 meters. Additionally, the virus may be transmitted via small droplet nuclei, especially during aerosol generating procedures. Ocular route of infection has also been speculated, and infection through any other routes are yet to be proven. This virus also could be transmitted indirectly via contaminated surfaces. The following infection, 99% of the infected will take about 2 to 14 days to manifest the disease. Now, let me talk a bit about this phenomenon called the super spreader events. Super spread event is said to happen when a large number of people get infection from one infected person. Sometimes the number of infections could be more than 10 from one event. Studies have shown that super spread events be contributing to 80% of this pandemic, where about 10 to 20% of the infected are contributing to this. So a small number of people are contributing to the larger proportion of the pandemic is called super spread events. And super spreaders can be asymptomatic, pre-symptomatic, or symptomatic. And these events occur predominantly in closed spaces like this, crowded spaces, and during close human-to-human contact. The infectious period is considered from about 2 days before. A person is considered infectious from about 2 days before the onset of symptoms and signs to 8 to 10 days following the onset. Studies have shown that most of the SARS-CoV-2 infected people are not infectious after 8 to 10 days. But prolonged expression of the virus can be seen certain situations, such as in severe disease and in immunocompromised patients, such as the cancer patients. However, a patient who became positive can remain PCR positive for a long duration despite not shedding the infectious virus. I have seen patients being positive for more than 2 months. The clinical disease of SARS-CoV-2 resembles a pyramid, where the most remain asymptomatic, and most of the symptomatic will have mild disease, and lesser will have severe disease and complications. The disease COVID-19 has been seen in all age groups, where up to 20% of symptomatic may require intensive care. The case fatality rate of COVID-19 is about 2%. The clinical features of COVID-19 resembles that of an influenza-like illness, where fever, cough, shortness of breath, sore throat predominantly can be seen. Now let me show these two generalized graphs which show the phases of COVID-19. In the first week of the disease, what is predominantly seen is active viral replication, where use of an antiviral drug, if available, can be used efficiently. The pathology of the subsequent weeks are predominantly due to immune and inflammatory phenomena. The early use of immunomodulators, if available, can be useful. In the second week, the embolic phenomena can be seen in patients, which warrants for early anticoagulation therapies. The complications of COVID-19 can involve many organs, such as heart, liver, kidneys, and thought to be caused by immune phenomena, and to a certain extent by post-viral infections, the bacterial infections. And there is growing evidence suggesting that the virus triggered autoimmunity to be a major culprit of the disease process. The risk for disease complications seems to increase with advancing age, and patients with comorbidities, again, like in cancer patients, are considered high-risk groups for these complications. The predominant pathology seen in severe disease in the lung involvement, general, because the lungs, it is the most directly affected organ. The pathological features of lungs show features of ARDS similar to that of other severe coronavirus infections such as SARS or SARS-1 and MERS. Studies done suggest that SARS-CoV-2 viral gene products in infected cells can downplay the innate immune response, causing impaired interferon production and triggering a cascade of pro-inflammatory processes. And this aberrant innate immune response may be responsible for all pathogenic processes. Protective immunity following infection. Generally, we would expect a long-lasting immunity from a viral infection, like in measles, for example. But as in many coronaviruses, it's shown that the natural immunity following SARS-CoV-2 may last up to only a few months, which makes reinfection a possibility. And due to this, it will be difficult to achieve herd immunity following natural infection itself. And a reinfection from this virus has been demonstrated, although it has thought to be rare. It's thought to be rare. Now, let's talk a bit about the laboratory diagnosis. Since this is a respiratory virus, the detection of the virus is done by direct means. The samples for this virus may be either collected from upper respiratory tract or the lower respiratory tract and transported in a special medium called the viral transport medium in a cold condition in the lab. So there are special conditions to collect and transport specimens for virology. Sometimes we can use indirect methods such as antibody detection to support the diagnostic process. The current gold standard in SARS-CoV-2 diagnosis is the real-time RT-PCR, where the RNA in viruses are converted to DNA and amplified in a cascade of reactions to be detected by specific fluorescent probes. So that is the PCR what we do. PCR is almost 100% sensitive and specific, provided the samples received by us are in good quality. We use PCR for both diagnosis and monitoring purposes. The shortcoming of PCR testing in Sri Lanka currently and in the rest of the world is the limitation in availability in the number of tests. Yeah. What other assays do we have? There are other molecular assays similar to PCR being developed in the world. One good example, such good example is the RT-LAMP assay, which can be deployed at a lower cost and with a shorter turnaround time. Many of these assays are still in the development stage and not available for routine testing in Sri Lanka. Antigen detection tests are common. It's a common topic that we discuss nowadays in Sri Lanka because everybody is talking about antigen test kits. So these test kits utilize immunochromatography methods to detect viral antigens from a given sample. There are few commercially available assays worldwide, and Sri Lanka also now there is an availability of these antigen kits. The major advantage is that this test can be used for a large number of people, especially in a field screening setting, and the results can be obtained within 20 to 30 minutes. The major drawback of this test is that it has reduced sensitivity compared to the PCR test. So therefore, a negative antigen test result cannot be interpreted as a negative result, but as only as an inconclusive test result. IgG antibodies for the virus can be detected after about 2 weeks following the infection. And detection of antibodies are useful in making a diagnosis, especially when the PCR results become inconclusive, and we use it here as well for that purpose. And antibody tests are also used for epidemic studies and evaluation of experimental therapies and vaccines. So, management of COVID-19 patients have evolved. I'm talking about therapies and vaccines. Management of COVID-19 patients have evolved today from a mere supportive care to specific care to reduce symptoms, so reduce complications. The best examples in the current use is the use of anticoagulants and corticosteroids in symptomatic patients. There are many specific antiviral therapies under investigation, while certain products such as the antiviral remdesivir, the monoclonal antibody cocktail bamlanivimab, it was given to Trump as well, if you go back to the news, and they are already approved by EU with emergency use authorization by the US FDA. And there is an unprecedented focus on this disease globally in the scientific and the medical community. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of treatment modalities being trialed in the world today. So as of this morning, I looked at the WHO International Clinical Trials Registry, and there are 6,601 trials registered just for COVID-19. So hopefully we may see more new therapeutics soon. As soon as the pandemic was declared, a global collaboration was formed to battle the pandemic with the primary goal of making diagnostics, therapies, vaccines and healthcare infrastructure available to all countries. So this is predominantly overseen by the UN agencies such as WHO and other not-for-profit organizations such as the Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines. So COVAX initiative is the vaccine arm of this collaboration, which will ensure that the countries like ours will get a vaccine when available. Normally, a vaccine takes about a decade from inception to marketing, and it costs billions of US dollars in production. Candidates for SARS-CoV-2 vaccines are in an accelerated pipeline, hoping that they would be delivered within a couple of years. There are multiple coronavirus vaccines approaches trialed out today. So there are so many approaches. They include DNA, RNA vaccines, live attenuated vaccines, inactivated vaccines, subunit vaccines, and viral vector vaccines. At the moment, there are more than 150 candidate vaccines in various clinical stages, while 10 vaccines are in phase 3 clinical trials. However, there are no vaccines given approval outside clinical trials for day-to-day use. Very recently, Pfizer and BioNTech announced, this is a US company, that their mRNA-based vaccine has promising results in phase 3 preliminary data showing that it's more than 90% effective. So the general standard is the WHO will accept it if it's more than 50% effective. So a few days after announcing these Pfizer vaccine results, Russia announced that their adenoviral vector vaccine Sputnik 5 that it has also showing promising results with more than 92% of efficacy in phase 3 trials. And the search for the COVID-19 vaccine has become the modern space race. In fact, the COVID vaccine may be one of these instances where the vaccine immunity is superior to the immunity of that of the natural infection. Because generally, if you get some infection like varicella, measles, because you get a very stronger immunity than what is conferred by a vaccine. But here, since the virus may be downplaying the immune response, a vaccine may be a better option, especially if you want to achieve herd immunity. Now, let me briefly talk about prevention of infection. Since SARS-CoV-2 is an envelope virus, it is highly susceptible to many disinfectant agents, including detergents and alcohol-based disinfectants. In this slide, you can clearly see and compare the susceptibility of this pathogen with other non-infectious agents. In fact, envelope viruses are the most susceptible and most unstable infectious agent in free environment. Since this is a respiratory virus, it is recommended that healthcare workers constantly adhere to standard precautions, contact precautions, droplet precautions, and airborne precautions whenever necessary. Proper hand hygiene practices are a very important step in prevention of acquiring a transmission respiratory viral infection. As we are aware, we are living at a stage where this infection can be possibly transmitted to anyone from the community. Therefore, the infection control practices routinely followed in clinical settings must be adapted to the community settings as well. Being a developing country with poverty and deficiencies in infrastructure, the challenges are larger in achieving this goal, but possible with proper commitment. Living the new normal would be the role of a responsible citizen, covering nose and mouth, good respiratory etiquette, minimizing human-to-human contact physically. Hand hygiene practices must be a universal practice. Testing, contact tracing, and isolation of the infectious will help in reduction of transmission and case reduction. Future vaccines, when available, may help to minimize complications in the infected and reduce the transmission. Perhaps the virus might be less prevalent in the community with time as yet another established coronavirus. I mean, with time, it's my feeling that it will become less virulent because there will be in the later coming years, if we get vaccines and if this virus goes in the community, there will be some sort of herd immunity, and the virus spread will be impeded, but it will have a cost in terms of lives. So I understand this pandemic is a depressive state for everyone, but there are far bigger threats on our path. One such threat is the ever developing antimicrobial resistance, which may push us back to the edge of the pre-antibiotic era. It is estimated that AMR will be one of the biggest killers in 2050, which will kill far more people than in this pandemic. So these threats they emerge due to human activities. And there is an even more bigger threat in the horizon, which would end the civilization as we know it. There is a climate change due to global warming. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Saranga, for your very informative presentation about this novel virus, which is the reason for this successful virtual platform also. So in future, I think probably next session also, we don't know whether we are going to mix with the live and the virtual also, we don't know. Right, there are a few questions from audience. Would you like to answer?
Sure. Yes.
Right. The first one, after how many days of viral entry, a patient can infect another person, and can PCR direct in that time?
Yes, generally a patient may become symptomatic in from 2 to 14 days, and there are exceptions, like one person may go beyond that. And if you consider infectivity in a symptomatic patient, you generally consider that person as infectious before 2 to 3 days, or generally take 2 days before the onset of symptoms till about 10 days after the onset of symptoms. In the asymptomatic groups, we generally go back up to like 10 days because we don't know when patient started treating the virus. That is a standard practice at the moment.
Right. Thank you, Saranga. So second question is, in more series published in the world, cancer patient come as the least affected. In cancer patient, immune system is defunctional. So isn't it a reason for not showing the cytokine triggered lethal disease? What is your view?
It could be, but it depends. We don't know how our innate immune responses act, because the way I see most of these viral infections, most of the people who have good innate function may be able to overcome it, but having aberrant innate immune systems, they may be more prone to this virus. And again, with immunosuppression, it has been shown that these patients are, especially cancer patients, so in the global literature also, they consider cancer patients as a high-risk group.
All right. The other question is, any value of wearing overalls or PPE routinely as a doctor? For example, in the corridors of the hospital or clinic, where you can maintain the distance actually.
Can you please repeat that?
The wearing routine overalls and PPE in the clinics or corridors.
Yeah, generally a PPE, whatever worn, should not be worn all over. Like if you go to a place and if you get exposed to a patient, then you should remove it and you should put another set of PPE because to minimize cross contamination, that is one thing. Ideally, if you can cover your nose and eyes, and if you can maintain good hand hygiene, prevent indirect contamination, that would be okay. But in reality, it doesn't happen. That's why we wear other things. But this is not Ebola. So something like Ebola, which may be transmitted by body fluids, you can have full body cover. But at this moment, because there can be, especially in a clinical setting, we don't know how we are exposed to the patients, because we work in agitated situation. So better to have your body covered if possible.
Right, okay. So can oropharyngeal swab be used for reverse RT-PCR instead of nasopharyngeal swab?
So generally, I mean, if you are going to take samples, you should take sample from the site of infection. So for example, if there's predominant upper respiratory symptoms, then upper respiratory tract is chosen. Then if it is predominant lower respiratory tract, then lower respiratory tract samples are taken. And again, if you consider when you consider the upper respiratory tract sampling site, the nasopharynx is shown to be superior than the oropharynx. But combined bilateral nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal sample is proven to be superior to each of these, nasopharyngeal samples alone. And again, if the symptoms, signs of pharyngitis is there, because that is probably a site of infection, and at that point, sampling, I think it would be better to be done from the oropharynx if there is pharyngitis.
Right. So next question is, have you validated the rapid antigen test in Sri Lanka?
Yes, I haven't done it first, but my colleagues have done it. So one particular test, I can't remember the data offhand, but somewhere around 80%, I think the sensitivity is there and be shown to be specific.
Right, this is my question, Saranga. If vaccine is a really green light, so if it comes, how are you going to store? Because the storage will be a problem for us, I think.
Yes, I mean, there are certain vaccines, an ideal vaccine should be able to be stored in room temperature, because ours is a tropical climate. And if you look at this Pfizer vaccine, it's an mRNA based vaccine which requires -70 to -80 cold storage. So it would be a difficult task, but I think there should be logistics. And there are the other vaccines also, which are more stable in much hotter, like in the refrigerator storage conditions. Anyway, we have to address that separately.
Right. There are lots of questions. So next one is, can you elaborate on the difference between the current viral strain in Sri Lanka and that in the first wave?
Yeah, actually, I haven't done much. I mean, this is what I have read. So there are viruses keep evolving. I mean, this is an RNA virus, and once it starts replicating, there are so many progenies with different genetic makeup, and only few survive. And with repetitive replications, the virus adapts and becomes like more fit to that replication in the subsequent generations. So whatever we have detected in terms, like there are variations, but in terms of infectivity, it has increased because it has become more fit. It's like natural selection. But in terms of pathogenicity, there aren't any differences shown when you compare the earlier ones and the later ones globally. When in Sri Lanka, I think.
Right. Can we do antigen test for primary contact case instead of the RT-PCR?
Primary contact tracing we can do, but I would recommend, depending on the situation, the only thing is we cannot say it's negative, but if because the sensitivity is lesser when you compare to the PCR assay. We at some point we may have to use it. Depending on the availability of PCR, we cannot use because this is a developing country, and I know that there are lots of people asking to do PCR to scale up PCR, but we are something we are gradually doing because there are issues with the logistics, the human resources, and the hosting and things like that. At the moment, I would prefer PCR, but later on we may need to do antigens as well.
So next question is vitamin D deficiency adversely affected by COVID?
That is a controversial. I am yet to see good evidence on that, but I think having a weaker immune system may have its repercussions.
Right. What's the place of the rapid antigen test actually?
The place of the rapid antigen test, because one thing, rapid antigen test can be used in the field setting. So a person with appropriate personal protective equipment can use that test, and you can test a large number of people in a field setting. So you can do that for detection of one other thing. The rapid antigen test, whatever you're detecting may not be just positive cases. Specifically, the antigen is in higher number of virals. So generally, what you are picking up are infectious people. So that is something which is very helpful, even though it's not very sensitive when you compare with the PCR. So we can use it in the field setting to detect, do it in large groups and see who is positive, and we can then continue with this contact tracing and isolation and so on.
What's the ideal time to do the PCR? Because when there's a positive case, all are getting panic and asking to arrange
Yes.
the PCR. So what the criteria for low risk and the high risk in the hospital setting?
Yeah. So ideally, if we can do it every day, it would be ideal. But practically, it's not possible. So generally, what we do is sometimes we do a baseline PCR depending on the context, because sometimes we may need to see whether this person has been already infectious. So sometimes depending on the decision, we do the baseline. Then like midway, so incubation period generally 2 to 14 days. So somewhere around day 6, day 5, we can do one. Then at the end of incubation, day 14, we definitely have to do one.
Right. So another question, if a person is exposed to a corona patient and on day 5 PCR is negative, is there a risk of infection which was not detected by
Yeah,
this?
as I mentioned, so this person may be already incubating the virus, and whatever the virus replicating in the respiratory tract may not be enough to be picked up by the PCR test or on the sampling method. So we may miss that case. That's why I said that you should definitely do a PCR if the other PCR were negative, then you should do a PCR at day 14.
Is Sri Lanka in community transmission stage now?
It's a very difficult question to answer, because I don't want to give any conflicting answers to the whatever told by the administration. I think in Colombo and the western province we see large clusters. But I oversee the lab at Anuradhapura, and I constantly keep in touch with my colleagues in other labs. So we don't get kind of community transmission there. But here, I can't say definite community transmission, but it's at a large extent here.
Right. Another 2 more questions I think I can ask. What do you think of wearing gloves routinely, which prevent you from washing hands?
Only thing, if you wear gloves, then it may sometimes give false assurance, but especially in a clinical setting, if you do the proper donning and doffing, gloves are essential. But if you wear them constantly, you don't know whether you have touched something and you touch your face. It doesn't make much of a difference.
I think this is the final question. Is there an added advantage of wearing goggles in clinical practice to protect the eye?
Yes, because there has been cases where people claim, the people who work in clinical settings in other countries claim they have worn the N95s perfectly, and they claim that they have got the infection possibly via eyes. So anyway, eyes, the ocular, this epithelium also had the receptor for this virus. So maybe it gets infection established there and later getting transmitted down to the respiratory tract to the nasolacrimal duct. So there are certain viruses such as the influenza virus, the H5N1 has been shown to behave in that way as well. So it's one possibility. I cannot say definitely, but anyway, we recommend wearing the goggles with the standard PPE. That is a recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Saranga. On behalf of SLCO, I like to extend my thanking for your excellent presentation and clear answering. Thank you.
Thank you.